Welcome back. In this video, I'll show you a simple program on how to map a Java class to a table in database and how to perform various create, read, update, delete operations. Before we go further, let me tell you, if you have purchased the course, you might have got my workspace and also the lab instruction. So if you have purchased, you might have downloaded this Hibernate workspace. This workspace contains all the projects which contain solution and start. Extract the zip file which you have downloaded and it looks like this. And also I'm using Eclipse. So I downloaded this Eclipse and I opened the Eclipse. While opening the Eclipse, it will prompt you to switch to workspace. You can switch your workspace or give this extracted folder as a workspace. All the projects will be appearing like this, which are grouped. So make sure you don't import the projects. You have to extract the zip file and switch your workspace. If you import the projects, you may not get this grouping. So all the projects might be confusing. So make sure whenever you are selecting the workspace while opening Eclipse, you give this extracted folder as this workspace. That's fine. Now before we go further, let me set the plugins, how to install the plugins. So go to help and you have to go to Eclipse Marketplace. It will show you all the tools available. You just have to search for JBoss tools. It will show you something called as JBoss tools. Right now the latest version is 4.3. By the time you might be working, the version might have changed, but make sure that this is installed on your Eclipse. So it comes up with Hibernate plugins. When you try to install this, there might be a lot of plugins which it will show, but only select the Hibernate related plugins. Hope you know how to install the plugins. Proceed. So once you are ready, let us see how to map. In my first group, I have the first projects. All these projects are Maven projects. It will be very easy to manage the dependencies. So what I did is I created a Maven project simply like this. File, new Maven project. I created a simple project. So I selected some working set. I already created a working set. So next I gave something like group ID com.way to learn online and some project name. So I'll say 01 test. That's it. I created all the projects like this. So this test project is appearing, and in this pom.xml file, if I open, it will be almost like empty. What I did is I copied the dependencies. So in the solution, if you see the pom.xml, I have copied all the required Maven dependencies. So here are all the dependencies. What you can also do is whenever you're creating a new project, this contains all the dependencies. I'm copy pasting all these dependencies to this project. And if you see here, these are all the Hibernate dependencies. Right now Hibernate 4 is the latest version. In my next videos I'll talk about the differences between Hibernate 3.6 and Hibernate 4. The concepts are same, a little bit of changes are present. We'll discuss about them. So I have included right now the Hibernate dependencies, etc. And finally, if you see, I have configured to use the compiler as JDK 1.8. So if you don't have JDK 1.8 on your machine, make sure that you install JDK 1.8 and make sure that your Eclipse points to that JDK. Okay. So once that's set, let me go through the first one. I have a class Hey, one more thing. Once you have added format XML, you have to right click on the project and say maven update project. Once you imported your projects, if the projects are showing some errors, try to do like this. What you have to do, you have to right click on the project, maven update project, and maybe you can also say add out to date or select all for the first time. And okay, so right now I selected only this project and I'm saying okay. So errors are gone. So make sure you do that. Right now I'm deleting this project. Already the projects are created for you. I will work on the start project. If you see, I have a class called as account. Account is having account number, name, balance, city, country, start date, etc. I want to map this account class to a table. So in Hibernate, we write mapping of class to table inside a file ending with hbm.xml. HBM stands for Hibernate mapping. Now, it's also a good practice to have the HBM file in the same package as your domain class name, domain class. So how to create this XML? Since in the first step, if you have gone to marketplace and installed Hibernate plugins, you'll be able to do like this. Right click, new, other, I'll type Hibernate XML mapping file. I'll take this next. It is asking me for the package. I select the package in which my .java file is containing, so I'll select it. I don't want this. Okay, so remove package and add only the class. What class? Account class. Next. See, it is automatically giving us the hbm.xml, right? So I will just finish. It will automatically give you the hbm.xml file. Is that? So it is generated right now. Today is date. So if you see, the mapping has everything, but for clarity, I advise you not to use this wizard to generate the mappings until you learn. But once you learn the concepts, then using the tools might be a very good option. So right now what I do is I'll just delete it and I'll map it one by one so that I can explain you everything. So root tag of your Hibernate mapping file is Hibernate mapping, and to map a class to table, we have a class tag. So here we are mapping class to a table. Okay. Then in database, tell me, is it mandatory that every table should have a primary key? No, right? So it's not mandatory that every table should have a primary key. But in Hibernate, whenever you are mapping a class to a table, that class should have a primary key. It's must. So whenever you are mapping keys, there are different types of keys. Business keys, which has a business meaning, and surrogate keys, which do not have any business significance. Take an example. If I have a class called as account in my bank application, so account class has account number. So in banking, account number has significance. So account number is an example of a business key. But suppose if you have a class where you cannot find any unique column, then what you can also do is you can go for surrogate key. Surrogate key is a key which does not have any business significance, and it is some random value. It contains some random value. So whenever you are configuring keys, you can choose to have either a business key or a surrogate key. It's up to you. But every class which is mapped to table in Hibernate must have a key. We'll see how to actually generate the primary keys automatically by using various strategies next. But just right now understand that every class should be mapped to have a primary key. Right now in this case, I have a field called as account number, which I want to map it as primary key. So to map primary key, we have to use a tag called as ID. And I'm giving name. Whenever you see name, if I press control space, it is showing me all the properties of my account class. I'll select account number. Name is nothing but the property name of your class. And to which column do you want to map? I'll say a underscore num. Either I can map the column name here, or inside ID I can have a column name is equals to a underscore num. Whenever you are using column tag, you have other options like you can specify the length of the column, or some precision, SQL type, unique constraints you can add, etc. So it's up to you whether you want to write a column tag or you want to use a column attribute. So I'll use column attribute to be very simple right now. I'll say a underscore num. Now, whenever you are using IDs can be automatically generated in Hibernate, and Hibernate comes up with lot of generators. So to configure a generator in Hibernate, you have to use generator, and I'll say class equals to assigned. Suppose if you want the IDs to be business keys, which has some business meaning, like in case of our account number. Whenever you are configuring business keys, by using some business logic, you may want to generate this account number. You don't want it to be automatically generated. So we have to use generator as assigned. Assigned means in this case Hibernate will not automatically generate it, you have to assign it. We'll see various other generators next. Okay, I mapped the ID, that's fine. Now I'll map the other properties also by using property tag. Property name is equals to say name, and I'll say sorry, not properties. Again, it's good that I did a mistake. I have to use property, not properties. So it's a name, and you have to use column. I'll say a underscore name. This is the name of the column in my database. You can of course give the length, etc. here itself. Okay. If you want to add a not null constraint, you can add a not null constraint, etc. here. Then you can write a property tag for others as well, like I have balance. But for balance, I'm not configuring column name. If I don't configure any column name, the variable name or the property name inside my domain class will become the column name by default. And also I'll map others like by using property city, country, and start date. So like that I have mapped all. If I don't give column, remember the variable name will become the column name automatically. Okay, so I have mapped the class to table using this hpm.xml. Then did I tell to which database to connect to? What is the URL, username, password, driver? I didn't say anything. So all such configuration can be written in a file called as hibernate.cfg.xml. So how to write this hibernate.cfg.xml, how to generate it in src main resources, we should have all the configuration files. So I'm creating new other, and again I'll type hibernate to filter. Here is an option to generate the Hibernate configuration file. The extension is cfg.xml. I'll say next. By default, the file name will be hibernate.cfg.xml. I'll take the default. It need not be always hibernate.cfg.xml. It can be something else as well, like way to learn.cfg.xml. But there are something else to be done if you select your own name, but if you go with defaults, there are some advantages. We'll see about how to rename this file next. Let me proceed. Next. Here it is asking me database dialect. So I'll be selecting MySQL because I want to use MySQL database. So what is this dialect? Basically, in Hibernate, if you are using Hibernate, we won't be writing queries using SQL. We'll be using Hibernate query language, HQL. So there should be someone who can actually convert these HQLs to SQLs. Based on your database, a dialect is the one who will convert your HQL queries to SQL queries. Since I want to use MySQL, I selected MySQL dialect. Actually, I'm using MySQL version 5 InnoDB. I will select MySQL 5 InnoDB and I'll select the driver class name. This is the driver class name. Connection URL I'll give here as JDBC MySQL / localhost / the database name I'll give as something like HDB, meaning Hibernate DB. And then for my database, I have the username as root and the password also as root. Make sure that whenever you're creating your database, the password is root because on all my CFG files in all other projects, I'll be using username and password as root. So better maybe whenever you're configuring your database, give the same password so that you need not change the values every time. So I'll say finish. There is something called as create console configuration. We'll see it later next. I'll say finish. See, hibernate.cfg.xml has been created, and if I see the source mode, the driver class name, password, everything have been created. This hibernate.cfg.xml is a main configuration file, and a lot of other configurations are there. I'll show you a few more configurations now. Whenever you are doing development, there are many options. You may want the tables to be automatically created by seeing the HBM files. If you see these HBM files, is there information about the whole table? What is the table name? Account. And what is the primary key column name? Account number. What are the other column names? Here are the names. So by seeing this HBM, the DDL files can be automatically generated. The DDL queries can be automatically generated. DDL stands for data definition language. That means the queries for creating tables, alter tables are all nothing but DDLs. By seeing this HBM, we want the DDLs to be automatically generated. So there's an option which you can configure in Hibernate to generate the DDLs automatically. So the property is HBM to DDL.auto. If I say the value is say create, the meaning is if the tables are not existing in this database, that means tables means what? In this case, account table. If the tables are not existing, automatically create the tables. But if the tables are existing, the tables will be dropped and recreated if you use this create option. But we don't want the existing tables to be dropped because we'll be losing a lot of our information. So generally what we do is we use an option value called as update. So if I use HBM to DDL as update, that means if tables are not existing, Hibernate will create them. If tables are existing and if the table structure is same as what is told by HBM.xml, Hibernate will not do anything, right? If this is option. But let's say in your table you have 5 columns. In your table you have 5 columns, but in your HBM file you have mapped 6 columns. So what? In this case, Hibernate will issue an alter table statement. Table will be altered and a new column will be automatically added to the existing table. So that's the meaning of update. But you may have a query. What if the table is having say 6 columns, but in HBM.xml, if there are only 5 columns, what will happen? Will the column be dropped? Remember, whenever you are using this update option, update value for HBM to DDL.auto, uh, take columns will not be dropped because we feel that there might be some important information inside your columns. So Hibernate will not take that risk. Remember that tables or columns will not be dropped if you are using update option. So this is one configuration which we can do. And also during development, I feel good if I can see all the SQLs on console. So if you want all the generated SQLs on console, you can configure show SQL to true. So if you configure this, whenever a HQL has been converted to SQL, or whenever Hibernate is trying to fire any queries, those queries will be printed on the console. It will be a very good tool for debugging. But if you just say show SQL to true, the queries will be in a single line. If your query is so big, it will be really difficult for you to understand if the whole query is in a single line. So we use one more option, format SQL to true. So if you say format SQL to true, all the queries will be formatted into multiple lines and they'll be in readable format. So these are the basic options which I'm using right now, but I'll come back to this file and I will see few more configurations later. So now what you have done, you have configured the Hibernate and told what is your database name, driver, username, password, dialect to be used, and you want tables to be automatically created, and you configured such that all the queries will be shown on your console. That's fine. Now, do you remember what is the dialect? What is the purpose of a dialect? Just to revise, dialect is responsible for converting HQL queries to native SQL queries. So based on your database, you have to select your dialect. So if you are using Oracle, you have to select Oracle specific dialect. Okay. Then you have already mapped the class to table inside this hbm.xml. And remember, this hbm.xml should always be, it's a good practice to have this hbm.xml in the same package, but it can be anywhere. Okay. So we are done with these two steps. Now what I want to do is I want to insert an account object into database. So already I have some code which we can use. I have a save demo.java. So here I have an account object created and I have to-dos to be done. So first one I'll do is I have to read the configuration file. What is my main configuration file here? cfg.xml, is it? So let me create an object of configuration. So new, I'll say configuration. New configuration. This is a way to create an object of configuration. Now the question is, once I am creating new configuration, what will happen? Is this hibernate.cfg.xml loaded? No. If whenever you are saying new configuration, this constructor is, if you see here, I control click, it is using new settings factory, and here if you see, there is some code which will load all the default values. Okay, there is some code which will actually load all the default Hibernate properties. So whenever you are saying new configuration, hibernate.cfg.xml is not loaded, but it will load all the default Hibernate properties, that values are present inside the code. But if I have to show you that configuration, let me show you. You have to download the Hibernate distribution, and inside the Hibernate distribution there will be a file called as hibernate.properties. Let me show you. This is the distribution which I have downloaded from the Hibernate site, and I have extracted this here. And inside this, if you see project etc folder, there's a file called as hibernate.properties. Let me open it. This hibernate.properties contains all the default configurations. These are the keys and values. So there are a lot of commented properties, and see, there are default configurations. So if you don't configure anything, the default database which will be used by Hibernate is HSQL DB. So if you see, hibernate.dialect is configured with HSQL dialect, driver class name, username, password, and URL. So this hibernate.properties contains all the default values which we can override inside our cfg.xml. So if you see hibernate.dialect, I gave it as MySQL. The default one, if I don't give here, the default value of this hibernate.dialect will be the one which is given here. So this new configuration will load all the default values which are looking similar like in hibernate.properties. So once all the default Hibernate configurations are loaded, we want to override some of them. So what I do is I'll say cfg.configure. cfg.configure, what this will do is it will look for a file called as hibernate.cfg.xml in the class path. Suppose if your cfg.xml file is something like way to learn.cfg.xml, then what you can do is you can use any one of the overloaded configure methods and give the file path. In this way you can load any cfg.xml, but it's always a good practice to stick to the defaults. We'll use a file name as hibernate.cfg.xml only right now. So once the configuration is loaded, if you see under Hibernate configuration, I have configured something called a session factory. So basically, if you want to talk to database using Hibernate, you need to open something called as Hibernate session. But how to create this Hibernate session? You have to create something called as Hibernate session factory. How to create this Hibernate session factory? By loading this configuration. So if you go back, what I can do is I can initialize session factory by using cfg.build session factory will create an object of session factory. Once I have a session factory, I can say session factory dot open session. Actually, there is one more method also called as get current session. We'll see what is the difference between open session and get current session a little later, but right now I'm using open session. I got a session object. That's fine. Now I'll say session dot save, and I have an account object here. I want to save that account object. So session dot save will issue a insert query. Let us check. And finally, I'm closing this. Let us check. In my database, I'll make sure that there's a database with name HDB. I'll drop the existing database and I'll recreate it HDB. Okay. So now let me run it and check whether insert query will be fired or not. If you see, there are a lot of logs. I'll talk about the logs. But if you see, there is an exception. What is it saying? Unknown entity account. Oh, what is this entity? Any Java class, any domain class mapped to a table is nothing but entity. Here in this case, we have mapped account.java to a table inside this HBM file. So account is an entity. I wrote this HBM file, but where is this HBM file loaded? Nowhere, right? If you see, here hibernate.properties is loaded and hibernate.cfg.xml is loaded, but where is this account.hbm.xml loaded? If you want that to be loaded, what you have to do is inside the session factory itself, you have to write a mapping tag and configure resource is equals to, in which package is it? com/, com/way to learn online/model/account.hbm.xml. So now I have told where is the location of my HBM file. Now let me run and check what will happen. Again it is saying IDs for this class must be manually assigned before calling save. Why is it? Let me go here. I have configured class is assigned. That means you are telling to Hibernate that you are going to assign the value, but did you assign here? If you see, whenever I am creating account object, I didn't assign. So right now I'll say account dot set account number. It's a long object, new long of 1. Now let me run it. So I always prefer to tell you by making mistakes. I'll make some mistakes and you will be learning from my mistakes. See, if you see here, are you able to see the insert query somewhere? No, I cannot see insert queries nowhere. So I said session.save and I expect insert query to be fired, but it is not. So I'll do one thing. I'll say something called as session.flush and check. Okay, again let me run. Oh yeah, why is it 2 accounts are inserted? Oh sorry, this is debug. In debug mode it is showing a debug level log as well. So you can see that insert query is fired, but let me check in my database. Is the table created first? Yes, table is created, but there are no rows. Insert query also is fired, but there are no rows. The problem is here you saved, but there is no transaction. The transaction got rolled back. So if you want to work with Hibernate and make some inserts or updates, you need to begin a transaction. How? You have to say session dot begin transaction. Sorry, session dot begin transaction. Begin transaction. You will get an object of transaction. And then once you are done, you can just say tx.commit. Okay, let me run and check now. Insert query I am able to see, but let me go to database and check. Refresh. Yep, I can see one row with ID 1. That's nice. So if you want something to be going to database, you need to work with transactions. I'll go into the details of what is exactly happening when you start a transaction, what is exactly happening when you open a session. We'll go into details next, but this is a way to save. And one more thing, I have configured a generator strategy as assigned, but what I can do is, if I want the database to automatically generate, right now I'm using MySQL database, so I'll use a strategy called as identity. If I am using a strategy called as identity, I'm telling to Hibernate that the database will use identity strategy to generate the primary keys automatically. So in this case, identity means who will generate? We are telling that database will use its identity generation strategy to do it. Hibernate has its own identity generation strategy called as increment. So let me drop this table. I'm dropping this table. Okay, now the database is empty and I have configured to use identity generation strategy. Let me run this. Okay, table might have been created and everything should look fine. The insert also is there. Now let me go here and refresh. Yep, there's account table. And if you see here in the definition, account number is configured with auto increment. So in this case, MySQL is using its own identity generation strategy as auto increment. That means it will increment the ID by 1 every time. And if you see the query, when the insert query is fired, Hibernate, is it sending the account number? No, right? Just because Hibernate will take care of it. Hibernate will automatically increment it. Is it? Okay, let me just go and drop the table again. Okay, then I'll go to here and I'll say assigned. Let me make you observe it. Again, I will run it. Just observe the query will contain account number as well. Because you are assigning in your code, the value has to be propagated to database. But if you use the strategy as a identity, then you are telling that database will use its own identity generation strategy. But all the databases may not support identity generation. Oracle does not support identity generation automatically, but MySQL supports using an auto increment strategy. That's the reason why we are able to use it. Whereas Oracle does not support identity generation strategy. So in such cases, for Oracle, there is something called a sequence, which we use. So Oracle, if you have worked with Oracle, you might be knowing what is a sequence. So for Oracle, you will be using something called as a sequence, and we'll see again the detailed configurations on how to configure the sequence generation strategy next. There is one more generator called as increment. In this case, if you are using increment strategy, let me show you. I'll drop the table once more. Okay, now I configured increment. Let me run this code. If you see, while inserting, is there account number? Yes. So in this case of increment, who is assigning the values? Am I assigning the value? Oh yeah, I need not assign the value. I will delete it. Sorry, I can even delete it. So who is assigning the values? Hibernate is assigning it. How? If you see the queries which are fired, there's a query which is fired called a select max of account number. So Hibernate will get the maximum account number during the starting of session factory and keep it in memory. And Hibernate will always increment by 1 and will use that as an identifier, right? So you understood what is the meaning of increment. Remember, whenever you use increment, Hibernate will increment it in memory. But whereas whenever you are using identity, a database will use its own strategy for generating the identifier. But if you are using MySQL uses auto increment, which is similar to increment. But only difference is, if you are using identity, the database will generate it by incrementing, and if you are using increment, Hibernate will generate in memory and then send it to database. These are the various generator strategies. We'll discuss more on generation strategies next. Now we have understood how to basically save an entity by using basic Hibernate API. In our next video, we'll go further and we'll understand how to perform other CRUD operations like update, delete, merge, and we'll also understand the internals of what is happening inside the session. So see you in next video. Before you go ahead, what you have to do is after you see the video, You just have to open the lab documentation given to you. Hope you have downloaded this lab docs, extract the zip. You will be having a PDF file with this Hibernate basics. So open this and you can complete only up to case 1 just. So after you see the next video, you'll be working on the other cases as well. See you in next video.